What if the most dangerous villain in your fantasy story is actually your own writing? After more than 2 decades of crafting and analyzing fantasy worlds, I've noticed a disturbing trend. Countless writers, even talented ones, are sabotaging their stories with the same old villain cliches. The problem is quite often not the fact that these cliches are used in the first place, but how they are used. So in this video, I'll expose the 7 deadliest mistakes that are plaguing fantasy stories everywhere, and at some point in your writing journey, I bet that you considered at least one of them yourself as well. Imagine you're reading a fantasy novel. The villain, let's call him Kareem, has just revealed his master plan. He's going to use an ancient artifact to, wait for it, destroy the world. The Dark Lord with a doomsday device cliche is about as fresh as year-old bread in a medieval tavern. It's not just overused, it's a narrative crutch that can cripple an otherwise intriguing antagonist. The idea of an ultimate weapon can be compelling, sure, but when it's used to prop up a lackluster villain, it becomes about as effective as a butter knife at a dragon slaying contest. This trope often lacks nuance and believability. I mean, if you had the power to destroy the world, wouldn't you have more complex motivations? Real villains aren't cartoonishly evil. They are driven by personal desires gone awry. So how can we salvage Kareem from this cliché quicksand? Well, instead of simply using a doomsday device for the sake of using it, what if his goal was at least a bit more relatable? Perhaps he's trying to save his dying homeland and our hero's realm is collateral damage. Or maybe he believes the current world is irredeemably corrupt and his doomsday device is actually meant to reset civilization, allowing him to rebuild society from scratch according to his ideals. Remember, the most compelling villains are those whose motivations we can understand, even if we don't agree with them. So ditch the doomsday device and dig deeper into what really drives your antagonist. But be careful. In your quest to explain your villain's motives, you might stumble into our next cliché. Picture this, Kareem, our now not so generic Dark Lord, has finally captured the hero. Victory is within grasp. And then, he starts talking, and talking, and talking some more. He reveals his entire backstory, his master plan, and probably even his Wi-Fi password while he's at it. Welcome to the world of villain monologuing, where bad guys seem more interested in amateur storytelling than actually winning. This cliché is the narrative equivalent of leaving your front door wide open and hoping burglars will politely wait outside. It undermines tension, makes your villain look like an idiot, and insults your reader's intelligence. But how do we reveal Kareem's motivations without resorting to this narrative crutch? Well, let me introduce you to a little technique I like to call Show Don't Tell, the Villain Edition. Instead of having Kareem spill the beans in one long convenient info dump, try revealing his motivations through his actions. Then let the hero piece together his plan bit by bit and use other characters, discover documents, or the consequences of Kareem's actions along the way to build up his backstory and motivations. For example, imagine Kareem is systematically buying up all the farmland in a kingdom. The hero might first only hear rumors of failed crops, then discover a magical blight affecting the land. Only later do they realize Kareem is behind it all, creating a food shortage to control the population. Each revelation builds tension and keeps your readers engaged without a monologue in sight. Remember, in real life, people rarely explain their evil plans in detail. But while we're on the subject of explanations already, there's another cliché that often serves as a poor excuse for villainy. One that might make you roll your eyes even harder than a villain monologue. Picture this. Just as you're getting invested in Kareem as a complex antagonist, the story suddenly hits you with his tragic past. But wait, the narrative seems to say. Kareem isn't really evil. He just had a tough childhood. Oh yes, welcome to the land of the misunderstood villain with a tragic backstory. It's a place where every baddie has a sad origin story and apparently therapy doesn't exist. You know the type. They start as innocent souls, but then life throws them a curveball. Maybe their pet goldfish died or they didn't get invited to the cool kids party. Next thing you know, they're trying to plunge the world in eternal darkness. Now, don't get me wrong here. A well-crafted tragic backstory can add incredible depth to a villain. The problem arises when it's used as a lazy shortcut to evoke sympathy or justify evil actions. It's become so predictable that readers often see it coming from a mile away. So when does this trope work, and when does it fall flatter than a pancake in a fantasy tavern? It works when the tragic backstory fundamentally shapes the villain's moral compass and worldview. Consider a scenario where Karim was born into slavery in a magically enforced caste system. His quest to unravel the fabric of reality itself could be an attempt to rewrite a world that he sees as fundamentally unjust. This backstory doesn't just explain his actions, it challenges readers to consider the lengths they might go in the face of systemic oppression. It doesn't work when the backstory is used as a band-aid to cover poor character development. If Karim's villainy is explained away by a single traumatic event without exploring how it shaped his beliefs and decisions over time, you're missing an opportunity for rich character development. Remember, tragedy doesn't automatically equate to villainy. It's the choices made in response to that tragedy that define a character. So the goal isn't to excuse your villain's actions, but to make them understandable. Your readers should be able to say, I do not agree with what Karim is doing, but I can see how he got there. Now, having said that, some writers take this concept a step further, diving into the deep end of pop psychology to explain their villain's behavior. Which brings us to our next cliché. Imagine this. You're reading a fantasy novel and you discover that Karim, a terrifying dark lord, turned to evil because his father never hugged him. Now, if you just rolled your eyes so hard you saw your own brain, congratulations. You've just encountered the villain with mommy daddy issues cliché. This trope is like the fast food of villain backstories. It's quick, it's easy, and it leaves you feeling unsatisfied and a little guilty. It's as if all the world's problems could be solved with a good family therapist and a group hug. Now, family dynamics can absolutely shape a person's worldview and actions. I certainly know that from experience. The problem arises when it's used as an easy explanation for evil, a one-size-fits-all solution to the complex question of villainy. So how can we make Karim's family-related motivations more nuanced and compelling in this instance? Well, what if Karim's father was actually a renowned peacekeeper, dedicated to maintaining balance between warring kingdoms? Young Karim idolized him as boys tend to do, following in his father's footsteps. But during a terrible conflict, Karim watched his father's peaceful methods fail, leading to the destruction of their homeland and his father's suicide. This experience didn't just make Karim sad or angry, it fundamentally changed his worldview. He saw how fragile peace was and how ineffective traditional diplomacy could be. As a result, Karim became obsessed with creating a unified empire, believing that only through obsolete control could true peace be achieved. Now, Karim's villainy isn't just about daddy issues. It's about a complex web of experiences, beliefs, and choices. His father's failure was a catalyst, not a simple cause and effect. The goal here is to create a villain who feels like a real person, not a walking trope. The family history should inform their character, not define it entirely. And speaking of defining characters, let's move to our next cliché and talk about a particularly problematic way how some writers choose to portray their female villains. Picture this. Karim, our complex villain, has a right-hand woman. She slinks into the scene, all curves and sultry glances, using her feminine wiles to ensnare the hero and further Karim's nefarious plans. Welcome to the problematic territory of the seductive evil queen or femme fatale. This trope isn't just tired, it's downright problematic. It reduces female characters to their sexuality, implying that a woman's powers lie solely in their ability to seduce. But fear not, we can create complex, compelling female characters without resorting to these worn-out stereotypes. Let's reimagine Karim's right-hand woman, shall we? Meet Tara, Karim's most trusted advisor. She's charismatic? Yes, but not in a come-hither way. Her charisma comes from her intelligence, her vision, and her unwavering conviction. People are drawn to her because she promises a world of peace and stability, not because she's batting her eyelashes at them. Oh, don't get me wrong, she is attractive, but that's not her defining feature or even her primary tool. At times, she deliberately dresses plainly or even intimidatingly, more concerned with commanding respect than turning heads. A well-written female character should be able to strike fear into the hearts of heroes without ever having to strike a pose. Her power should come from who she is and what she can do, not just how she looks. Moreover, the seductive evil queen trope often fails to explore the complexities of female villains. Real villains, regardless of gender, are driven by ambition, ideology, or a twisted sense of justice. not just a desire to be desirable. So what if Tara's allegiance to Kareem stems from a shared vision of a better world, albeit achieved through questionable means? Perhaps she's the architect of that grand plan, with Kareem serving as a charismatic figurehead. This approach challenges readers to consider how intelligent, capable individuals might be drawn into extremist ideologies, making for a more nuanced and thought-provoking narrative. Now, if you found anything useful in the video so far, please consider giving it a like to help me grow the channel. Thank you. Moving on, let me share a cliché that when poorly executed can undermine your reader's investment in the entire story. Just when you thought Kareem's backstory couldn't get any more complex, enter the evil mentor betrayal. It's a plot twist that's become so commonplace, it's lost its ability to surprise. Picture this, Kareem had a mentor, an older statesman named Thorn. In a cliché version, Thorn would be kindly and supportive right up until the last moment when he suddenly reveals he's been pulling Kareem's strings all along. This abrupt heel turn often feels forced and predictable, leaving readers more annoyed than shocked. A well-executed betrayal can be more satisfying than finding an extra fry at the bottom of the bag, but the problem arises when it's not properly set up, making it feel as unconvincing as an orc's disguise at an elven ball. But what if we build this betrayal more carefully? Perhaps Thorn genuinely believed in peace, but years of failed negotiations left him jaded. He saw potential in young Kareem and subtly guided him towards a more aggressive approach, all while maintaining his public persona of a peace-loving diplomat. The betrayal, when it comes, isn't a sudden switch from good to evil. It's a tragic result of years of disillusionment, fear, and a mentor's misguided attempt to create a lasting peace through any means necessary. A good betrayal should feel both surprising and inevitable. Your readers should be shocked at that moment, but then look back and think, of course, how did I not see that coming? Moving on, sometimes in our quest to create compelling characters, we might accidentally overshadow our main villain, which brings us to the last cliché. Picture this, you spend the entire book building up Kareem as the ultimate villain, but as you're writing, you find yourself more drawn to his charismatic Lieutenant Vax. Before you know it, you've given Vax all the best lines, the most intriguing backstory, and the coolest abilities. Congratulations, you've just stumbled into our final cliché, the henchman who's more interesting than the big bad. When the hero finally confronts Kareem, readers might be left thinking, but what about Vax? I want to know what happens to him. When your subordinate villain outshines the main antagonist, it's like having a supporting actor steal the show in a blockbuster movie. Sure, it might be entertaining, but it ultimately detracts from the central conflict and can leave your climax feeling anticlimactic. The key to avoid this is balance. Make sure Kareem is just as layered and interesting as his subordinates. Use Vax to enhance Kareem's character, not overshadow it. Perhaps Vax's loyalty, despite his doubts, highlights Kareem's charisma and the allure of his vision for a unified, peaceful world. A great story has room for multiple interesting antagonists. The trick is to make sure they complement each other and serve the overall narrative, rather than competing for the reader's attention. In conclusion, creating compelling villains is more art than science. It's about finding the right balance between familiar tropes and fresh ideas, between complex motivations and clear goals. Now, not having the cheap use of these cliches ruin your story is certainly a good start, but when it comes to the things and people you throw at your hero, there are other mistakes that you definitely want to avoid. So check out this video here where I share the 8 worst antagonist mistakes and walk you through how to avoid them in your story.